I'm Ryan O'Dowd, and this is the Black Hand Communique. Today's episode will be titled The Methods of Control. And this episode is not going to be as formally about a thesis and proving something as the last few episodes have been. It's more just going to be me thinking and discussing and kind of talking as I think about what the methods of control are and how they're used against us in American civil society, in particular because I only know what it's like to be an American. I don't know what it's like to be somebody else. I think that at the core of this idea of the methods of control is an ancient and easy to understand concept, which is the carrot and the stick. The carrot representing the promise of some kind of pleasure or reward for behavior, and the stick being the promise of punishment for a negative behavior. Now, as far back as there have been humans governing other humans, so let's say going back to Babylon at least, these two methods have been used in order to get people to do what the powerful want them to do. And it's really insidious, actually, and it's developed to a very sophisticated level in our culture, because what I would say the powers that be, if you want to call them that, what I would say the powers that be understand about this is that it operates on so many different levels that it doesn't particularly matter what you're promised that will give you pleasure or what you're promised that will give you pain, because simply being in a matrix that is working on this pleasure and pain principle, while it's controlled by some, group or individual, whether it's a fast food place offering you the deliciousness of a fatty piece of meat, or the government itself offering you a rap of the stick, so to speak, in terms of jail for nonviolent crimes. Whatever it is that is the application of this principle is inherently going to reinforce this principle in people's minds. So it doesn't even matter really if what's being punished and what's being rewarded, because in all presentations of punishment and reward on purpose by a group of people, it's reinforcing the punishment and pleasure principle itself. See, for thousands of years, I mean, it's ultimately drawn from nature, if you really get down to it, because in nature we're always seeking to be fed, to have sex, to reach material comfort, to not be rained on, to not die of disease. This is something that even a cat or a pig can understand. But it's taken to a different level when the principle of avoiding pleasure and seeking pleasure and avoiding pain is then understood, internalized, and controlled by a small group of people in order to manipulate all other human beings. And the pleasure and pain principle is so important to understand when you're thinking about the methods of control, the means of control, because the pleasure and pain principle is the core execution of any government, essentially, any person trying to enforce an economic system. And that leads me to a fun idea or a disgusting idea, that how you think of it, which is I think that the reason that drugs are illegal in our society is because they offer a more powerful pleasure reward than money does. And it's dangerous to the powers that be for there to be a more powerful reward out there than money. Because money is the way that we are, that's our dominant pleasure principle in American culture. It's money or the promise of using money for things that you like, So if you have drugs floating around which basically hijack the dopamine center of the brain and reward it simply for taking the drug, then people are going to start seeking drugs instead of seeking money. You see, money works on the same pleasure, dopamine, serotonin um, part of the brain that drugs do. It just doesn't do it as well. And then you might think, well, why don't the powers that be just give people drugs for doing work? Well, this is kind of complicated. God damn it, I'm stuttering. I'm sorry. In an indirect way, they do, because all the products that you can buy are designed to flare up your dopamine centers, which inevitably leads to you to crashing, just like if you're smoking crack, and that desires you to want more, which gets you to work for them, which is what they really want more than anything. The powerful, in my opinion, use this method of control, the carrot and the stick, in order to get people to complete their vision of whatever the world is or should be, or whatever they want for themselves. I would argue it's psychopathic mostly, but there are times it's not even psychopathic. There are people that manipulate and get people to do things that are better than they would do if they weren't being manipulated. That is a reality, right? I mean, how many, let's think of religious institutions, and they're obviously a mixed bag at best. But like the Salvation Army, how are you going to organize people to feed the homeless unless you're using this pleasure and pain principle on them, probably manipulating their faith, but in the end, what do? You get people to feed the homeless. So it's just a little caveat that it is possible to manipulate people to do something better than they would do if they wouldn't. Nonetheless, it's usually used for psychopathic ends, personal enrichment, greed, or just in the more noble members of the powers that be, an effort to put a new philosophy in the world that they really think will improve the world. Like someone like Elon Musk genuinely trying to get rid of climate change. But Elon Musk is still using the pleasure and pain principle to manipulate the people in his company. So the methods of control are the same regardless of the end and how psychopathic or not psychopathic it is. And it's all ultimately based on the carrot and the stick. So you have this principle of the carrot and the stick at work in every factor of society, and no matter how it's being used or who it's being used by, it's always reinforcing itself. I would say that it's safe to proclaim that since it was discovered in ancient Babylon, and initially the kings and the priests started to use it to manipulate people to have agriculture and feed each other and have business transactions on clay tablets, it has expanded since then. And there's been moments of contraction when there was less manipulation because there was less knowledge on how to do it. But over time, the pleasure and pain principle gets further and further embedded into the subconscious mind of the human being. I think to the point where most people aren't aware that they are being manipulated whatsoever. And especially in regard to consumption, they're taught to appreciate being manipulated. Oh, look, we gave you a job. So isn't that great? You get a paycheck. We're doing you a favor. Oh, thank you so much for giving me this great opportunity to do what you want me to do for less than I'm worth as a human being. No. That's bullshit at the core of it. And people will tell me I'm biting the hand that feeds, but I disagree because nature is the hand that feeds. The trees are going to grow apples regardless of whether or not Dole has planted those trees and paid Mexican migrants to pull the apples off the trees. Nature's going to make the fucking apples grow in the first place. So don't tell me I'm biting the hand that feeds. I'm biting the hand that bites the hand that feeds. It's different. Anyway, so I hope this has been somewhat enlightening into the notions of methods of control, particularly the carrot and the stick, the pleasure and pain principle. I know that I didn't really, set out to prove a point or advocate a set of ideas here, just to explore an idea. But I hope it has been somewhat entertaining for you and informative. And if you got anything to say, tell me it. Even if you don't like me, it's okay. I like getting in arguments with people, so you're fine. This is Ryan O'Dowd of the Black Can Communique saying, fuck you, Banks.